He took everything from me, my house, my savings, even the little things I thought were mine forever. He smiled in court as if he had won, never realizing that what he was destroying was not just my life, but something far more powerful, something he could never take, no matter how hard he tried. You are about to hear the story of how my life was shattered and rebuilt in ways he could never imagine. Before I start, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what you would do in my place. My name is Angela Bird. I am 30 years old, and I never imagined that my life could change so drastically in just a few months. I was married for 8 years, and I thought my husband, Jason, and I shared a life built on love, trust, and mutual respect. We had a beautiful home in a quiet suburb, a comfortable life, and I believed that our marriage would last forever. I worked hard, not just at my career, but also to make our home a place of warmth and happiness. I cooked. I planned. I tried to make everything perfect, and for a while, it seemed like it was enough. Then, everything started to unravel. It began with small comments, almost invisible, about how I spent money or how I managed our home. At first, I brushed them off. I told myself that he was stressed at work, that he did not mean anything by it. But the comments grew sharper, colder, and more frequent. I began to feel that the person I loved was changing, or perhaps that I had never truly known him. The realization hit me slowly, like a shadow spreading across my life. I remember the day he first mentioned divorce. It was cold, calculated, and sudden. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his eyes unreadable, and said that he wanted everything in the divorce: the house, the savings, even the car I had bought with my own money. I froze. My heart pounded, and I felt a mix of fear and disbelief. How could someone who once promised to share a life with me now want to take everything? I tried to speak, to reason, to remind him of our years together, but he was unmoved. He smiled in that way he always did when he felt he had the upper hand. I was scared, but I was also furious. I realized that the man I loved was no longer the person I thought I knew. At that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I told myself that he could take the material things, the items, the bank accounts, but he would never touch my mind, my creativity, or my will. He had no idea that in trying to destroy my life, he was awakening something in me that had always been quiet, but powerful. The first few weeks after he filed for divorce were the hardest. I spent hours walking through empty rooms in our home, imagining him already taking everything while I felt invisible. I cried, I questioned my choices, and I wondered if I had failed in some way. But deep inside, I felt a spark, a sense that this was not the end, but the beginning of something I could not yet see. I decided then that I would not be a victim, that I would survive, and that one day he would realize that he had underestimated me in ways he could never imagine. After the shock of the divorce announcement, I knew I had to act carefully. I could not let anger or fear control me. Jason was smart, and he would try to manipulate the process to his advantage. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every decision, every detail about our finances and property. I realized that knowledge was my weapon. While he believed he had the upper hand, I was quietly preparing for a future that he could not see. I was determined to protect not only myself, but also the life I had built with my own hands. I remember the day I met with my attorney. She was calm, professional, and immediately made me feel that I had options. She explained how he could try to take the house, the savings, and even the investments I had contributed to, but there were ways to protect my interests. The legal system was complicated, but it was not impossible. I had to think strategically, not emotionally. I left the office with a sense of clarity I had not felt in weeks. I realized that this was not only a legal battle, but also a mental and emotional one. As the weeks passed, I began to focus on rebuilding my confidence. I took long walks every morning, clearing my mind, imagining my life not as it was lost, but as it could be. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts, my plans, my goals. I remembered who I was before the marriage, the dreams I had set aside, and the strengths I had ignored. It was empowering to realize that despite everything he was trying to take, he could not touch my mind, my creativity, or my determination. Every page I wrote was a reminder that my life was not over. It was simply changing. Then came the first surprise. Jason believed that I was struggling, that I would accept defeat quietly. He bragged to friends about how he was winning, about how he would take everything and leave me with nothing. He had no idea that his confidence was his weakness. While he flaunted his imagined victory, I was quietly building a plan that would not only protect my future, but also show him the depth of what he had underestimated. The irony was that in trying to destroy me, he had awakened a force in me that was unstoppable. I also started reaching out to my friends, those I had drifted from during the marriage. Their support was invaluable. They reminded me of my worth, my intelligence, and my resilience. I realized that divorce was not only about losing material things, but also about reclaiming my identity. I was no longer just Jason's wife. I was Emily, a woman who could survive, adapt, and ultimately triumph. Every small victory, every moment of clarity made me stronger, more focused, and more determined to see the process through. By the time the first court date arrived, I was not the same woman who had sat frozen at the kitchen table. I was ready. I had a plan, I had support, and I had a mindset that he could never understand. He believed he was winning, but he had no idea that the game had already changed. This was only the beginning, and he would soon discover that in trying to take everything from me, he had underestimated what I was capable of. The courtroom felt cold, intimidating, and impersonal, but I refused to let fear take control. Jason sat across from me, confident, smug, certain that he would walk away with everything. He smiled at the lawyers, at the judge, at anyone who looked in his direction. I watched him, studying every move, every expression, realizing that his arrogance was my advantage. While he focused on material possessions, I focused on the truth, on the reality that he could never touch my intelligence, my strategy, or my determination. I had learned to be patient, to wait, and to act at the perfect moment. The hearings began with arguments over the house. He claimed that he had contributed more financially, that I was not entitled to certain assets. I listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions through my attorney, and quietly building a case that would surprise him. Every claim he made, every boast, was a step closer to exposing the gaps in his logic. I realized that winning this battle was not about anger, revenge, or proving him wrong. It was about protecting my future and showing him that he had underestimated me completely. Outside the courtroom, life did not stop. I continued my daily routines, focusing on my career, my friends, and the personal growth I had rediscovered. I started investing my time in projects I had once postponed, learning skills I had ignored, and reconnecting with my passions. Every day I grew stronger, more confident, and more certain that I could thrive independently. Jason had assumed that taking everything would destroy me, but he had no idea that his actions were fueling my transformation. Each challenge, each obstacle, became a step forward in reclaiming my power. Then came the moment that shifted everything. My attorney uncovered documents showing financial decisions that Jason had made without my knowledge, investments he had claimed as his alone, and evidence that contradicted every boast he had made to friends and family. I remember feeling a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of relief and excitement. The man who thought he controlled the outcome had no idea that I was prepared for every twist, every attempt to manipulate the truth. For the first time, I felt the tide turning in my favor. I could see it in his eyes during the next hearing. His confident smile faltered, his arrogance weakened, and he began to realize that he had underestimated me. I remained composed, calm, and focused. I had spent weeks preparing, not just legally, but mentally and emotionally. I had transformed from a woman who feared losing everything into a woman who knew that no one could take away her resilience, her intelligence, or her spirit. Jason might have taken material possessions, but I had reclaimed something far more valuable: my power, my independence, and my voice. By the end of that day, I knew that the story was far from over, but the battle had shifted. The man who thought he could destroy me had awakened a force he could not contain. I realized that this divorce, as painful as it was, had revealed my true strength. I was no longer just a wife fighting to survive. I was a woman ready to thrive, to reclaim her life, and to show him that taking everything did not mean winning. In fact, it was the exact opposite. The final hearing was approaching, and I felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. I had spent months preparing, studying every detail, every financial record, every possible outcome. Jason still believed he had complete control, but I had learned to anticipate his moves. I walked into the courtroom with confidence, knowing that I was no longer the same woman who had cried silently in empty rooms. I had transformed, and I could feel the energy shift as I sat across from him. For the first time, I realized that the power he thought he had was an illusion. The proceedings began, and I listened carefully as his attorney presented arguments. He tried to paint me as someone who lacked understanding of the finances, someone who would easily accept whatever he demanded. I stayed silent, observing, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, my attorney began presenting evidence, documents, records, and financial statements that clearly showed how he had misrepresented facts, how he had attempted to claim assets that were legally mine. I could see the subtle shock on Jason's face. He was not prepared for this. It was a quiet triumph, but the most powerful moment came when the judge began asking questions. Jason stumbled over answers, revealing gaps in his claims. Every confident gesture, every smug expression he had worn so consistently, crumbled under scrutiny. I remained composed, calm, and unwavering. The months of preparation, the nights of strategizing, and the hours spent rebuilding my own life had led to this moment. I realized that winning was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and my future. After hours of proceedings, the judge ruled. Jason was awarded some assets, but the house, the majority of the savings, and the investments were legally recognized as mine. He could not believe it. The man who had confidently declared victory now sat in stunned silence. I felt a wave of relief, but also a quiet satisfaction. I had not only survived the storm, but I had also transformed it into a triumph. He had tried to destroy me, but in reality, he had underestimated the strength, intelligence, and resilience that had always been part of me. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. I knew that Jason would tell friends, family, and colleagues that he had won in some ways, but the truth was far more powerful. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my identity. The material possessions were important, but the transformation within me was priceless. I had faced fear, betrayal, and loss, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. In trying to take everything from me, he had inadvertently unleashed the force that would carry me forward into a life of independence, success, and self-respect. That day marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I realized that life is unpredictable, that people can deceive, and that even when everything seems lost, there is always a path to reclaiming your power. Jason had thought he could break me, but he had only awakened a woman who knew her worth, her strength, and her future. The divorce was over, but my transformation was only beginning. I was free, and for the first time, I truly understood the depth of my own power.